My father always treated affection like a quarterly dividend. When he announced over steak that my brother would inherit everything simply because he carried the Ross name, I swallowed the humiliation and stayed quiet. I thought being written out of the will was the worst thing that could happen that weekend. But the next morning, $5.1 million vanished from my brother's company, and I realized the inheritance wasn't a gift at all. It was a grenade. The flight into Briar Glen was bumpy, the kind of turbulence that rattles your teeth and makes you question why you ever left the ground. But it was nothing compared to the pit forming in my stomach. I was 33 years old. I had a life in Chicago. I had a career that did not involve navigating the emotional minefield of the Ross family dynasty. Yet, when my father summoned us, I still came. It was a reflex, conditioned by 3 decades of subtle Pavlovian training. Malcolm Ross did not ask. He invited, and in the Ross lexicon, an invitation was a command dressed in formal wear. I picked up a rental car at the small regional airport, a silver sedan that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and stale cigarettes, and drove the 40 minutes into town. Briar Glen looked exactly the same as it had when I left 10 years ago. It was a town of old brick and manicured lawns, a place where the trees were ancient and the money was quiet. It was the sort of place where people knew exactly how much your grandfather was worth, but would never be so vulgar as to discuss it over dinner. Dinner, however, was the entire point of this trip. My father had called it a legacy dinner. He had reserved the private room at the Ironwood, a steakhouse that had been serving overcooked beef and overpriced Cabernet since the Reagan administration. It was his favorite place. It smelled of dark wood, leather polish, and the unspoken understanding that the men in the room were important and the women were decorative. When I arrived, the hostess didn't ask for my name. She simply nodded and led me toward the back, past tables of men in suits and women with frozen smiles. The private room was dim, illuminated by a chandelier that looked heavy enough to crush us all. My father was already seated at the head of the table. Malcolm Ross was 68, but he carried himself with the vitality of a man who fed on conflict. He was wearing a navy suit, tailored perfectly to hide the slight softening of his midsection. Beside him sat Elena, my stepmother, a woman 10 years his junior who treated her facial expression like a poker hand she refused to show. And then there was Grant, my older brother, the heir apparent, Gabriella. "You made it," my father said, standing up halfway to offer a cheek that smelled of sandalwood. "We were just ordering wine." "Hi, Dad," I said. I nodded to Elena, who offered a tight, terrifyingly perfect smile. And then I looked at Grant. He looked tired. That was the first thing I noticed. Grant was 36, handsome in the way politicians are handsome, jawline sharp, hair perfectly swept, eyes that always seemed to be looking for the nearest exit. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first car, but he was gripping his water glass so hard his knuckles were white. "Hey, Gab," Grant said. His voice was forced, a little too loud for the small room. "Good to see you." We sat. The waiter, a man who had likely worked here since before I was born, moved around the table like a ghost, pouring wine and taking orders. My father ordered for the table, of course, a porterhouse for the men, fillets for the ladies, sides to share. It was a performance. Everything with Malcolm was a performance. "So," my father began, swirling his wine. The liquid coated the glass in thick, red legs. "I wanted to bring you both here tonight because we need to settle some things, the future things." I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. This was it, the estate talk. Elena took a sip of her water, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Grant shifted in his seat. "I have been meeting with the lawyers," my father said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming serious, grave. "The Ross legacy is not just about money, it is about continuity. It is about North Pine." North Pine Industrial Solutions was the family company. It was a sprawling, unsexy beast of a business that manufactured specialized valves and hydraulic systems. It wasn't glamorous, but it generated the kind of wealth that allowed my father to treat the world like his personal waiting room. Grant has been running operations for 2 years now. My father continued. He has stepped up. He carries the Ross name in business. He deals with the lenders, the unions, the headaches. He is the face of this family to the world. I knew what was coming. I knew it. And yet, the hope that I might be treated fairly was a stubborn, stupid thing that refused to die until the very last second. Because of this, my father said, looking directly at Grant, I have decided that upon my passing, the entire estate, the company, the properties, the investment portfolio will pass to Grant. The room went silent. The only sound was the clinking of silverware from the main dining room. Muffled by the heavy oak door, I stared at him. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. Grant looked down at his plate, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. He didn't look like a winner. He looked like a man who had just been handed a bomb. Now, Gabriella, my father said, turning his gaze to me. His eyes were blue and flat, like a winter sky. I don't want you to be upset. You have your own life in Chicago. You have your hobbies, my career. I corrected him, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. Right, my father said, waving a hand dismissively. You are the kind one, Gabriella. You have always been the soft heart of this family. You will understand why this is necessary. Business requires a certain hardness, a singular vision. Dividing the assets would only weaken North Pine. Grant needs the full weight of the estate behind him to keep the company strong. You are disinheriting me. I said, it wasn't a question. I am protecting the legacy, he corrected, and Grant will look after you. Of course, informally, but on paper, it has to be this way. I looked at Grant. Tell me he isn't serious. I wanted to say, tell me you won't accept this. Grant finally looked up. His smile was a grimace, a tight stretching of skin over teeth. It's for the company, Gab, he said. It's just structure. I looked at Elena. She was meticulously cutting her steak into tiny, bite-sized geometric shapes. She knew. She had known before we even walked in. She was the only one eating. I understand. I said. The words tasted like ash. I didn't understand. I was furious. I was heartbroken. But I was also a Ross. And the one rule in our house was that you never, ever let Malcolm see you bleed. Good, my father said. Satisfied. He raised his glass. To the future, Grant raised his glass. Elena raised hers. I raised mine. To the future. I whispered. I drank the wine. It was excellent. It tasted like money and betrayal. The rest of the dinner was a blur of forced conversation. My father pontificated about interest rates and local politics. Grant nodded at all the right times, adding, absolutely, and 100%, like a pull-string doll. I ate half my steak and focused on the pattern of the wallpaper. I noticed the small details, the cracks in the polished veneer. I noticed that Grant's hand shook when he reached for the salt. I noticed that my father kept checking his watch, not out of boredom, but out of a strange, rhythmic anxiety. I noticed that Elena never looked my father in the eye, not once. It felt scripted. It felt like a play where the actors hated the lines but were terrified of the director. When the check came, my father paid with a black card that made a heavy thud on the table. We'll see you at the house for breakfast, my father said as we walked out into the cool night air. Don't run off early, Gabriella. We need to look like a family this weekend. I drove back to the family estate, a sprawling colonial on the edge of town, and went straight to my old room. It had been turned into a guest room, devoid of my personality. The posters were gone, replaced by generic landscape paintings. The books were gone. It was a cold, neutral space. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the big, empty house. I told myself I would leave in the morning. I would get through breakfast, say my goodbyes, and never come back. I didn't need his money. I certainly didn't need his approval. But the morning had other plans. I woke to the sound of shouting. It was muffled at first, coming from the library downstairs, but the volume rose steadily until I could hear distinct words. You said it was handled. That was Grant. He sounded frantic. his voice cracking. "It is handled." That was my father. But his voice lacked its usual booming confidence. It sounded sharp, cornered. I got dressed quickly, pulling on jeans and a sweater, and went downstairs. The door to the library was open. Grant was pacing the length of the Persian rug, his phone pressed to his ear. My father was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, staring at a stack of papers, his jaw set so tight I could see the muscle twitching. I walked in. "What's going on?" Grant spun around. He looked like he hadn't slept. His hair was messy, and he was still in his shirt from the night before, the top button undone. "North Pine." Grant snapped. He pulled the phone away from his ear. "We lost the silent partner." "What?" I asked. "The capital," Grant said, his eyes wild. "The silent partner, the $5.1 million that anchors our liquidity covenant. They pulled out, this morning, effective immediately." I blinked. $5.1 million? "They can't just pull out," my father barked, slamming his hand on the desk. "There is a notice period. They are claiming a breach." Grant yelled back at him. "They sent a letter at 6 in the morning. They are withdrawing support. The bank is already calling. Dad, the covenant alarms are going off. If our liquidity drops below the threshold, the lender freezes the operating account. We can't pay the steel vendor. If we can't pay the steel vendor, the production line stops on Tuesday." "Grant, calm down," my father hissed, glancing at me. "This is a business matter. It's a disaster," Grant shouted. He looked at me, really looked at me. And for a second, the mask slipped completely. He wasn't the heir. He was a scared little boy. "Gab," he said, stepping toward me, "do you know anything about Mom's old accounts?" I froze. "Mom? She had been dead for 6 years. What are you talking about?" "The withdrawal," Grant said, talking fast. "The transfer order came from a holding company. I need to know if Mom ever mentioned—" "Grant!" my father roared. Grant stopped. He looked at our father, then back at me. He swallowed hard. "Never mind," Grant muttered. Stepping back, I'm just stressed. It's a mess. I need to take this call." He walked out of the library, heading for the terrace. Phone pressed back to his ear, begging someone named Carol to hold off on filing a report. I stood there, looking at my father. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was shuffling papers, pretending to read a document that I could see was upside down. "Why did he ask about Mom?" I asked. My father looked up. His face was a mask of irritation. "Grant is grasping at straws. He is panicking. This is his test. Gabriella, I told you, business is hard. He has to fix this." He mentioned Mom's accounts. "Dad, your mother didn't have accounts that matter," my father said coldly. "She had a checking account and a pin money fund. I handled the finances. You know that." He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "This is a business problem. Gabriella, it does not concern you. In fact, since Grant is occupied, perhaps you should make yourself useful. I need you to clear out the boxes in the closet, the ones I told you about last Christmas. I want that space clear for the new filing cabinets." He was dismissing me. He was sending me to clean the closet while the family empire burned. "Fine," I said. I didn't argue. I didn't want to be in that room anymore. I walked out, leaving him to his silence. But the question lingered. "Do you know anything about Mom's old accounts? Why would a $5.1 million silent partner have anything to do with my mother? She was a school teacher. She loved gardening and watercolor painting. She didn't do corporate finance. She didn't do liquidity covenants." I went to the closet in the hallway, the one my father used as a dumping ground for things he didn't want to look at, but couldn't legally throw away yet. It was stacked with bankers' boxes. I started pulling them out, moving robotically, old tax returns, expired warranties, and then, in the back, a box labeled Margaret Personal. My mother's name. I sat down on the floor, the parquet cold beneath me. I shouldn't look. It was an invasion of privacy, even in death. She deserved boundaries. But my father's voice was still echoing in my head. "You are the kind one. You will understand." I opened the box, It smelled like her perfume, lilac and rain. It hit me so hard my eyes watered. Inside, there were mundane things. Her reading glasses, a stack of birthday cards I had sent her, a silk scarf, and at the bottom, tucked beneath a photo album, was a thick manila envelope. It was sealed. On the front, in my mother's looping, elegant handwriting, it said, "Gabriella." My heart hammered against my ribs. I picked it up. It felt heavy. There was something hard inside. I turned it over. The flap was stamped with the logo of a law firm I didn't recognize. Hallow Reese, LLP. The date on the stamp was from 7 years ago, a year before she died. I looked at the door. It was closed. I could hear Grant shouting in the distance, and the low rumble of my father's voice on another line. I tore the envelope open. Inside, there was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery and a small, silver key. I unfolded the paper. There was no date. No, "Dear Gabriella," just one sentence, written in ink that looked like it had been pressed into the paper with force. "If they ever make inheritance sound like love, check the safe." I read it again. If they ever make inheritance sound like love. That was exactly what my father had done last night. He had framed my disinheritance as a kindness. He had framed Grant's burden as a gift. He had twisted the concept of legacy until it looked like affection. My mother had known. 7 years ago. She had known this moment would come. I looked at the key. It was small, old-fashioned. It looked like it belonged to a lockbox or a personal safe. I knew where the safe was. My father had a hidden floor safe in his home office, under the rug. He thought no one knew about it. But I used to hide in that office when I was a child playing hide-and-seek. I had seen him open it once. I sat there on the floor, the letter shaking in my hand. I should leave. I should put this back, pack my bag, and drive to the airport. I had a flight booked for tomorrow. But I could change it. I could be back in Chicago by tonight. I could pretend none of this happened. I could let Grant inherit the fire. I could let my father play his games. I hated conflict. I hated the yelling, the maneuvering, the feeling of being a pawn on a chessboard I couldn't even see. But then I looked at the letter again. Check the safe. It wasn't a request. It was a warning. My mother had been the quiet one, the one who smoothed things over, the one who endured Malcolm Ross for 35 years. But she hadn't just endured. Apparently, she had prepared. I closed my hand around the key. The metal was cold against my palm. I wasn't the kind one. Not anymore. I stood up, shoved the letter and the key into my pocket, and closed the box. I wasn't leaving. Not until I found out what $5.1 million had to do with a woman who supposedly only owned a checking account and a pin money fund. I walked out of the closet and headed back toward the noise of the family falling apart. I had a role to play. After all, I had to wait for the house to be empty. And then, I was going to see what my father had been hiding under the rug. The house was never truly quiet, even when empty. It hummed with the aggressive silence of expensive machinery, the sub-zero refrigerator cycling, the climate control whispering through vents, the grandfather clock in the foyer counting down seconds like it was billing us for them. It was 2 p.m. on Tuesday. Malcolm was at the country club for a lunch that would undoubtedly bleed into a strategy session for saving face. Grant was at North Pine, likely staring at spreadsheets that bled red ink. Elena had taken her Mercedes to the city for a spa appointment that I suspected was less about exfoliation and more about escaping the blast radius of her husband's temper. I was alone. I stood in the doorway of my father's home office. The room smelled of cedar and old paper, a masculine, intimidating scent that used to make me hold my breath when I was a child. I wasn't a child anymore, but my heart was hammering against my ribs with a rhythm that felt distinctly juvenile. I wasn't afraid of being caught. I was a 33-year-old woman, not a teenager sneaking liquor, but I was paralyzed by a deep, nauseating sense of shame. In the Ross family, privacy was a weapon. Malcolm guarded his secrets like state treasures, and breaching his space felt like a violation of the only religion he practiced: control. Snooping was beneath us. It was something common people did. But $5.1 million had vanished, and my mother had left me a key. I walked to the Persian rug that dominated the center of the room. It was heavy, wool, and older than I was. I knelt down, gripping the edge. It was heavier than I expected. I rolled it back, exposing the hardwood floor beneath. There it was, a floor safe, flush with the wood, cool steel against the warm grain of the oak. My hands were shaking. I looked at the small silver key in my palm. It seemed too simple, too fragile to open something this imposing. I inserted it into the lock. It slid in with a satisfying, terrifying smoothness. I turned it. There was a heavy thunk, the sound of a deadbolt sliding home. I pulled the handle up. The heavy steel door groaned on dry hinges. The smell that wafted up was musty, stale air that hadn't moved in years. I reached down into the dark cavity. It wasn't full of gold bars or stacks of cash. It was just paper. Piles of legal-sized envelopes, bound with rubber bands that had grown brittle with age. I flipped through them quickly, my pulse thudding in my ears. Deed, insurance, trust, deed, and then, near the bottom, a blue folder. It was thinner than the others. On the tab, written in black marker, were the initials G. Gabriella Ross, or Grant Ross. I pulled it out and sat back on my heels, the cold floor biting into my knees. I opened the folder. There were 2 documents inside. The first was a notarized promissory note. It was dense legalese, the kind of text designed to numb the brain. But the names jumped out at me. The borrower was North Pine Industrial Solutions. The lender was an entity I had never heard of. Juniper Ridge Holdings, LLC. I scanned the numbers, the principal amount, $5,100,000. I stopped breathing. This was it. This was the missing money. But it wasn't a bank loan. It was a note to this Juniper Ridge. I turned to the second document. It was an operating agreement amendment, referenced as a silent capital contribution. It outlined the terms of the investment. It was dated 7 years ago, the same year my mother died. I read the terms. Interest-only payments. Balloon payment due upon. My eyes caught a clause at the bottom of page 3. Triggering event. I didn't understand the legal jargon fully, but the numbers were undeniable. Grant's company hadn't lost an outside investor. They had lost a lifeline that had been buried in this safe. I took out my phone and snapped photos of the pages, my hands trembling so badly the first few came out blurry. I forced myself to steady my grip. Focus. Click. Focus. Click. I put the documents back in the folder. Placed the folder back in the safe and closed the heavy lid. I locked it. I rolled the rug back, smoothing out the fringe until it looked exactly as it had before. I stood up, dusting off my knees. I felt dirty. I felt like I had just stolen something, even though I had only looked at the truth. I went to the kitchen and made coffee, just to have something to do with my hands. I sat at the island, staring at the black liquid, waiting for the sound of a car engine. It took 2 hours. When Malcolm walked in, he looked energized. Crisis suited him. It gave him a reason to bark orders. He threw his keys on the counter and looked at me. "Still here," he said. "I thought you might have fled back to the safety of your spreadsheets in Chicago. I didn't rise to the bait." I took a sip of coffee. "I found something, Dad," I said. He paused, opening the refrigerator to grab a bottle of sparkling water. "Oh? Did you find the rest of the packing tape?" "I told the housekeeper to leave it out. I found a file in your safe," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. Malcolm slowly closed the refrigerator door. He didn't turn around immediately. He stood there, his back to me, the bottle of water gripping his hand. "You went into my safe," he said. His voice was low, dangerous. "Mom left me a key." I said, "She told me to check it." He turned around then. His face was composed, but his eyes were hard. "Your mother," he said, popping the cap off the water, "was a wonderful woman, but she was ill. Gabriella. Toward the end. The medication. It made her paranoid. She imagined things, plots, schemes. I saw a promissory note. I said, keeping my voice steady, to Juniper Ridge Holdings, for $5.1 million. That's the exact amount Grant just lost. Malcolm laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, devoid of humor. You are playing detective, he said. That is cute, but you are out of your depth. Juniper Ridge is just a shell, a vehicle for tax efficiency. It is standard estate planning. Then why did they pull the money? I asked. Why did the silent partner leave the day after you announced Grant gets the estate? Malcolm set the water bottle down on the counter with a loud crack. Because business is volatile, he shouted. The sudden volume made me flinch. Markets change. Risk profiles change. That entity. The managers decided to reallocate. It has nothing to do with the dinner. It feels like it has everything to do with the dinner. I said. It is complicated. Malcolm snapped. You wouldn't understand the leverage structures. Your mother certainly didn't. She signed papers because I told her to. Because she trusted me to handle the burden of wealth so she could play with her flowers. She was financially naive. Gabriella. And apparently, so are you. He walked toward me, leaning over the island. Put the key back, he said. Forget you saw the file. It is dead paper. It means nothing. It doesn't look like nothing. I said, It is nothing, he yelled. His face was inches from mine. I could smell the wine on his breath from lunch. If you mention this to Grant, he continued, his voice dropping to a hiss, you will only panic him further. He needs to focus on saving the company, not chasing ghosts your mother invented in a morphine haze. Do you understand me? I looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes. It was buried deep, under layers of arrogance and rage. But it was there. He wasn't angry because I was wrong. He was angry because I was right. I understand. I said, Good, he said. He straightened up, adjusting his tie. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have calls to make. He walked out of the kitchen. I didn't put the key back. I put it in my bra. Later that evening, the house was tense. Grant had come home looking like a ghost. He bypassed dinner, murmuring something about nausea, and went straight to the back patio to chain smoke. Grant didn't smoke. I found him there, sitting on a teak lounge chair, staring out at the darkened lawn. The tip of his cigarette glowed orange in the twilight. Grant? I said softly. He jumped, nearly dropping the cigarette. Jesus. Gab, you scared me. Sorry, I said. I sat down on the chair next to him. He took a long drag, exhaling a plume of smoke that drifted toward the stars. Did Dad talk to you? Grant asked. About what? About the partner. He said it was a tax vehicle. I said carefully. He said Mom was paranoid. Grant let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, that sounds like him. Paranoid, crazy, naive. Anyone who disagrees with Malcolm Ross is one of those three things. I leaned in. Grant. I saw the name. Juniper Ridge. Grant froze. He turned his head slowly to look at me. You saw it? I found a file. Grant crushed the cigarette out in a crystal ashtray that was likely worth more than my weekly grocery budget. You shouldn't have seen that, he whispered. What is it? Grant? Is it Mom's money? He rubbed his face with his hands. We were never supposed to talk about it, he said. Dad made me swear. When I took over as CEO, he told me the capital structure was unique. He said we had a silent backer who would never interfere. As long as we kept the covenants. And the covenant? I asked. What triggered the withdrawal? Grant looked at me, his eyes wet. The exit clause. He said, it wasn't about liquidity ratios or profit margins. I read the contract this morning. Gab. I finally read the fine print Dad told me to ignore. The money gets pulled if there's a material change in the beneficial ownership structure that contradicts the original intent, the inheritance. I realized, I don't know, Grant said, shaking his head. Maybe, Dad announced the transfer of the estate. Maybe that triggered a review. Maybe the managers of Juniper Ridge saw the news and decided the risk was too high. I don't know who runs it. It's a blind trust or something. All I know is that by trying to give me everything, Dad might have just cost me everything. He looked at me with a desperation that broke my heart. It shouldn't have happened. Gab, we were supposed to be safe. The next morning, I told my father I was going into town to meet an old friend for coffee. He didn't look up from his newspaper. I drove straight to the address, stamped on the envelope I had found in Mom's box. Hallow Reese, LLP. The firm was located in a renovated brownstone near the courthouse. It wasn't the kind of glass and steel fortress my father's corporate lawyers inhabited. It was modest, quiet, and smelled of old books. I didn't have an appointment. I told the receptionist my name, and 5 minutes later, a woman walked out. She was in her 50s, wearing a sharp gray suit and glasses on a chain. She looked me up and down, her expression unreadable. Gabriella Ross. She said, "You look like her. You knew my mother?" "I'm Sarah. I was the paralegal on your mother's file. Come back." She led me to a small conference room. She didn't offer me coffee. She sat down and folded her hands on the table. "I shouldn't be talking to you," she said. "Why?" "Because we don't represent the Ross family anymore." She said, "We resigned." "Why did you resign?" Sarah hesitated. She adjusted her glasses. Irreconcilable ethical concerns. She said, "That is the official term." "And the unofficial term?" She looked at the door, then back at me. "Your father wanted us to do things that we were not comfortable doing. He wanted to move assets in ways that obscured their origin. We refused. He took his business to Caraway Legal." I reached into my bag and pulled out the photo I had taken of the document. "Does Juniper Ridge Holdings mean anything to you?" I asked. Sarah didn't look at the phone. She didn't need to. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Juniper Ridge," she repeated. "Grant's company just lost a $5.1 million investment from them." I said, "I need to know who they are." "My father says it's just a tax shell." Sarah leaned forward. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "It is a shell," she said, "but shells have to live somewhere." She slid a notepad toward me and wrote down an address. "This is public record," she said. "Anyone with an internet connection could find it. I am not violating privilege by giving you an address that is in the phone book." I looked at the paper. 402 Elm Street, Suite B. "I know this building." I said, "My mother owned this. It was a little office building near the river." "She owned it," Sarah agreed. "But Dad sold it." I said, "He sold it to pay for her medical bills. He told us that. He said the insurance cap was hit, and he had to liquidate her assets to pay for the experimental treatment." Sarah's face hardened. She looked angry. Truly angry. "Gabriella," she said, her voice sharp, "your mother had excellent health insurance, and she had a separate trust for medical expenses. That building was never sold to pay for bills. Then why?" Sarah stood up. "I have said too much. But if you want to know about Juniper Ridge, go to that address and ask yourself why a man would lie to his children about how he paid for their mother's dying days." I walked out of the office feeling like the ground was shifting under my feet. The lie about the medical bills hit harder than the money. I remembered sitting by my mother's bed, holding her hand while my father stood in the hallway, looking weary and noble, telling us he was selling the Elm Street property to give her every fighting chance. We had looked at him with awe. We had thought he was sacrificing for her. He had been stealing from her. I drove to 402 Elm Street. It was a nondescript brick building. I checked the directory in the lobby. Suite B, Juniper Ridge Holdings, LLC. It was real. It was here. I drove back to the house, my mind racing. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was a picture I didn't want to see. When I got back, the driveway was full of cars, 2 black SUVs, my father's lawyer. A man named Sterling from the new firm was walking up the steps. I went inside. The living room had been turned into a war room. Papers were spread out on the coffee table. "Ah, Gabriella," my father said. He was pacing, a glass of scotch in his hand. Perfect timing. "What is going on?" I asked. "We are amending the trust," he said. "We need to move fast. Sterling says if we get the new structure signed and notarized today, we can show the bank that the estate is consolidated. It might calm them down. It shows stability." He pointed to a stack of documents. "I need your signature here, and here." "What am I signing?" I asked. "It is a waiver," Sterling said. He was a smooth man with too much hair gel. You are waiving your right to contest the immediate transfer of the business assets to Grant. It speeds up the process. Avoiding probate drama. Probate drama. I repeated. It is standard. Gabriella, my father said, snapping his fingers. Come on. Pen. I looked at Grant. He was sitting in the corner, staring at the floor. He looked defeated. Does this fix the Juniper Ridge problem? I asked. Grant flinched. My father turned on me. I told you to drop that. This is about saving the company. Sign the damn papers. I looked at Elena. She was standing by the window, her back to us. She was on her phone, texting furiously. I watched her thumbs fly across the screen. Then, she tapped the screen 3 times in quick succession. Select, delete, confirm. She slid the phone into her pocket and turned around, her face a mask of concern. Gabriella. Honey, she said. Please, for your father's blood pressure, just sign it. She was coordinating. I knew it. She wasn't just a bystander. She was talking to someone outside. I need to read them first. I said, Gabriella, my father shouted. I am not signing anything I haven't read. I said, my voice shaking but loud. I will take a copy to my room. I will read it tonight. I will sign it in the morning. My father looked like he was about to strike me. He took a step forward, his hand raising slightly. Sterling cleared his throat. That is, reasonable, Sterling said. We can wait until morning. My father lowered his hand. He glared at me. Fine, he spat. Morning. But if the bank calls before then, the collapse is on your head. I took the thick packet of documents and ran up to my room. I locked the door. I threw the papers on the bed and didn't even look at them. I sat on the edge of the mattress and pulled the letter out of my pocket. My mother's letter. If they ever make inheritance sound like love, check the safe. I realized then that she hadn't just meant the physical safe. She meant the safety of our narrative. She meant the foundation of our family history. My father had lied about the medical bills. He had lied about the silent partner. He was lying about the trust. I wasn't just checking a metal box. I was checking the reality of my entire life. I looked at the window. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the lawn. I picked up my phone and searched for the name of the forensic accountant my friend in Chicago had used during her divorce. Lena Hart. I dialed the number. It went to voicemail. Hi, I said. My name is Gabriella Ross. I think my father is trying to steal $5 million from a dead woman, and I think he's using me to do it. Please call me back. I hung up. Downstairs, I heard the front door slam. The lawyers were leaving. I was trapped in a house with a man who viewed his family as assets and liabilities, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be a liability. I was going to be a creditor. I was going to collect what was owed. I lay down on the bed, clutching the letter, and waited for the morning. The silence of the house was gone. Now, all I could hear was the sound of the fuse burning down. I set up the call with Lena Hart in the privacy of my rental car. Parked 2 streets away from the Ross estate, the house had started to feel like a panopticon, with my stepmother's watchful eyes and my father's suffocating presence making even a phone call feel like an act of treason. Lena was a referral from a friend in Chicago who worked in high-stakes divorce litigation. On the screen of my laptop, which I had tethered to my phone's hotspot, Lena looked nothing like the stuffy accountants my father employed. She had sharp, geometric glasses and a background that looked like a chaotic home office, stacks of files, a whiteboard covered in red marker, and a cat sleeping on a printer. I sent you the photos of the documents I found in the safe. I said. Lena nodded, her eyes scanning a second monitor off-screen. I'm looking at them. Gabriella, you need to understand something about money at this level. $5.1 million does not just vanish. It is not keys or a pair of sunglasses. It has mass. It has gravity. If it disappears, it is because someone built a trapdoor. What do you see? I asked. I see a mess, she said bluntly. But a calculated mess. This promissory note to Juniper Ridge? It is structured as debt, but the terms are incredibly soft. Interest only, No fixed maturity date until a triggering event. That is not how a bank lends money. That is how a family member lends money when they want to pretend it is business. My father said it was a tax shell. I said, "It is a shell." Lena agreed, but here's the irregularity. I pulled the public filings for North Pine's capital infusion 7 years ago. The money didn't come directly from Juniper Ridge. It was routed through 3 different entities, a trust in Delaware, an LLC in Nevada, and then finally into North Pine. Why do that? I asked. Obfuscation, Lena said. She leaned into the camera. You layer entities when you want the money to look smaller, quieter, or more deniable than it really is. If this was a standard silent partner, they would just wire the funds. Someone went to great lengths to scrub the origin of this cash. And now that the money is being recalled, the clawback is triggering alarms because the company was never built to repay it. It was treated as permanent equity. But legally, it was a revocable loan. So my father knew it could be taken back? He signed the paper. Lena said he knew, but he probably bet on the fact that the person controlling the trigger would never pull it. My mother, I whispered. Lena paused. If your mother is behind Juniper Ridge, then she held a kill switch for 7 years, and someone just flipped it. The conversation left me feeling nauseous. I ended the call with a promise to send her the trust amendment as soon as I could photograph it without Sterling. The lawyer, tackling me. I drove to the North Pine headquarters. It was a sprawling industrial complex on the edge of town, a landscape of gray corrugated metal and chain-link fences. Inside, the executive wing was a different world. Plush carpet, mahogany doors, the smell of ambition and stale coffee. I walked into the conference room unannounced. My father was at the head of the table. Grant was to his right. Around them sat the senior leadership team, men and women I had known since I was a teenager. They looked terrified. Gabriella, my father said, not bothering to hide his irritation. We are in a strategy session. I just came to see how I could help. I lied. Sit down if you must, he said, waving a hand, but stay quiet. I sat in the back. The atmosphere was toxic. My father wasn't leading. He was bullying. We need to cut the burn rate immediately, Malcolm said, tapping a pen against the table. The lender requires a liquidity buffer. I want a 20% reduction in headcount by Friday. Grant flinched. Dad, we can't cut 20%. That cuts into the production line. We will miss the delivery dates for the naval contract. Then make the remaining 80% work harder. Malcolm snapped. Cancel overtime. Enforce the salary freeze. If they don't like it, they can leave. We are saving the ship. Grant, we don't worry about the comfort of the crew when the hull is breached. But these are people. Grant said. His voice was weak. Barely a whisper. Some of them have been here for 20 years, and they have been paid for 20 years. Malcolm countered. Loyalty is a paycheck. If we stop paying, they stop being loyal. It is a transaction. I looked at the faces around the table. The VP of operations, a man named Miller who used to give me candy when I visited the office as a kid, was staring at his notebook, his face pale. The HR director looked like she was trying not to cry. This wasn't business logic. This was slaughter. Malcolm was treating the employees like chess pieces he was willing to sacrifice to protect his own king. Grant sat there, staring at the table. He didn't fight back. He didn't argue for the people he supposedly led. He just absorbed the abuse, shrinking into his expensive suit. That is when I realized the truth about the legacy dinner. The announcement that Grant deserved the entire estate wasn't about faith in Grant's abilities. It was about ownership. Malcolm didn't want a successor. He wanted a proxy. He wanted someone he could control completely, someone who would burn the village down if Malcolm gave the order. Meeting adjourned. Malcolm said abruptly, "Get me those lists by end of day." The executives filed out, looking like survivors of a natural disaster. Grant stayed seated. Malcolm stood up, checked his watch, and walked past me without a word. I closed the door. "Grant?" I said. He didn't look up. 20%, he whispered. "That is 40 families." "Gab, you don't have to do it," I said. "You are the CEO. Grant looked up then, and his face was ravaged. "I am not the CEO," he said bitterly. "I am the mascot." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the factory floor below. "He controls everything," Grant said. "The voting shares, the board seats, the trust. I have a title. But he has the leash. If I defy him, he fires me. And if he fires me, what am I? I'm a 36-year-old man with no other skills who has spent his entire life waiting for a permission slip." He turned to me. "He didn't pick me because I'm better, Gab. He picked me because I'm easier. You left. You built a life. You have a spine. I stayed. I let him mold me. And now he's going to make me fire 40 people to cover up a mistake he made 7 years ago. It wasn't a mistake," I said. "It was a loan. From Mom." Grant froze. "I told you to drop that," he said. But the anger was gone. It was just fear now. "I can't drop it. Grant, Lena Hart says the money was routed through layers to hide it. Someone wanted it hidden." Grant laughed, a hollow sound. Of course he wanted it hidden. His ego couldn't handle the world knowing his wife bailed him out. "Grant," I said, stepping closer, "if we can prove the money came from Mom, maybe we can prove the terms of the withdrawal are valid. Maybe we can stop him from gutting the company." "You can't stop him," Grant said. "He will burn it all down before he lets you win. You don't know him like I do. Gab, you see the father who ignores you. I see the boss who terrorizes us." He grabbed his briefcase. "I have to go write a list of people to fire," he said. He walked out, leaving me alone in the boardroom that smelled of fear. I drove back to the house, my mind racing. I needed more than just theories. I needed the voice. My mother had been a meticulous archivist. She kept physical letters, but she also kept digital records. My father had wiped her computer the week after the funeral, claiming it was too painful to see her files. But he had missed the external hard drive she kept in her gardening shed. I had found it years ago, tucked in a box of seeds. I had never looked at it. I had been too afraid of the grief. I went to my room, locked the door, and plugged the drive into my laptop. It whirred to life. Folders appeared, garden plans, recipes, book club, and one folder labeled audio notes. My mother used to record voice memos when she was driving or working in the garden. Ideas for paintings, reminders to buy milk. I sorted by date. The last file was dated 3 weeks before she died. I put on my headphones and clicked play. The sound of wind. She was outside. Then, her voice. It was thinner than I remembered, strained by the illness, but the cadence was unmistakably hers. "It is Tuesday. Malcolm is angry again. He found out I spoke to the lawyers at Hallow and Reese. He says I am betraying the family." A pause. The sound of birds chirping. He thinks the money is just fuel. He thinks he can pour it into the engine and drive as fast as he wants. He doesn't understand that the money is a wall. I put protections in place for Gabby. I have to. Grant is too much like his father. Or too afraid of him. I can't tell the difference anymore. Another pause. A heavy sigh. "If you are listening to this, Gabby, I am sorry. I wanted to leave you a garden, not a war. But Malcolm will try to rewrite the story when I'm gone. He will try to make himself the hero and you the spectator. Don't let him. The safe is the start. The trust is the end." The recording ended. I sat there, tears streaming down my face. Malcolm will try to rewrite the story. He had done exactly that. He had rewritten the history of the medical bills. He had rewritten the source of the capital. He was currently rewriting the estate plan to cut me out completely. I wiped my face. I couldn't just cry. I had to act. I needed to see the trust amendment, the one I had refused to sign. I went downstairs. The house was empty again. My father had returned to the office to oversee the bloodletting, as he likely called it. Elena was in the sunroom, reading a magazine. I slipped into the study. The papers were still on the desk where he had left them. A silent threat waiting for my signature. I didn't sign. I read. I flipped past the standard boilerplate until I found the section on distribution of assets. All rights, titles, and interests in North Pine Industrial Solutions and any affiliate business interests shall pass to Grant Ross. Affiliate business interests. It was a vague term. Usually, it meant subsidiaries, but in the definitions section at the back of the document, I found a new addition that hadn't been in the previous draft I had seen years ago. Affiliate business interests shall be defined to include any and all entities, holding companies, or investment vehicles that have provided capital, debt, or equity to the primary estate, regardless of the named manager. I snapped a photo and sent it to Lena. Her reply came 2 minutes later. He is trying to close the loop. If you sign this, you are disclaiming any right to Juniper Ridge. He knows Juniper is an asset of the estate, or should be, and he is making sure that when it eventually surfaces, it belongs to Grant automatically. He is cutting you out of the silent partner. But there was more. I went back to the photos I had taken of the Juniper Ridge document in the safe. I zoomed in on the signature line for the initial manager. It wasn't my mother's name. It wasn't Margaret Ross. It was Vance. Vance, my mother's maiden name. It was right there, hidden in plain sight. Vance. My mother hadn't just invested. She was the manager. She controlled the entity, which meant someone else was controlling it now. Someone who had triggered the clawback. Who? I heard footsteps in the hall. I shoved the papers back onto the desk and stood up just as Elena walked in. She stopped in the doorway. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere cardigan that looked soft enough to sleep in, but her eyes were sharp. Snooping again? She asked. Her voice was light, conversational, but there was an edge to it. I'm reading the document Dad wants me to sign. I said, that is what he asked me to do. Elena walked into the room. She picked up a crystal paperweight and turned it over in her hands. You are making this very difficult, Gabriella. She said, I'm not the one firing 40 people today. I said, Elena sighed. She set the paperweight down. Your father does what he has to do. He carries the weight of the world. You have no idea what it costs him. He is enjoying it. Elena. I said, I saw him today. He likes the power. He likes survival. She snapped. The mask slipped for a second. Her perfect composure cracked. He is terrified. Gabriella. He has been terrified for 7 years. Ever since your mother died. He has been waiting for the other shoe to drop. And now you are here, untying the laces. What shoe? I asked. The money? Elena walked closer to me. She smelled of expensive perfume and gin. Your father can't survive being questioned. She said, it is not just about money, it is about his reality. If he isn't the provider, if he isn't the genius, then he is just a man who lost his wife and alienated his children. He can't face that. And my job, our job, is to make sure he never has to. That is sick. Elena, that is marriage, she corrected. Or at least, that is this marriage. She looked at the papers on the desk. Sign the trust, she said softly. Go back to Chicago. Let Grant handle the mess. If you keep digging, you are going to find things that will hurt you more than him. Is that a threat? It is advice. She turned and walked out. I watched her go. Your father can't survive being questioned. She was right, and that was exactly why I had to keep asking. My phone buzzed. It was Lena. Call me. Now. I dialed. What is it? I asked. I ran a search on the filing timeline for the trust amendment. Lena said. Her voice was fast. Clipped. Your father isn't just rushing this because of the legacy dinner. He filed a notice of intent with the state regulator 3 days ago. What does that mean? It means he is trying to shield the assets from a creditor judgment. Lena said, if he gets the assets into this new trust structure, they might be protected from the Juniper Ridge clawback. He is trying to firewall the company so that even if the $5.1 million is called, they can't touch the core assets. But Juniper Ridge is the creditor. I said, exactly, Lena said. He is fighting himself. Or rather, he is fighting the ghost of your mother. But here is the problem. Gabriella, if he rushes this signature, it's fraud. If he transfers assets while knowing there is a pending claim, it is fraudulent conveyance. He doesn't care. I said, he should. Lena said, Because if a lender or a regulator is watching, and based on the panic at North Pine, I'd bet the bank is watching very closely. Then he is walking into a trap. What do I do? Do not sign, Lena said. Stall him. I need 24 hours to trace the current manager of Juniper Ridge. If Moss Vance was the initial manager, there had to be a successor appointed upon her death. We find that person. We find the lever. Who could it be? I asked. I don't know, Lena said. But whoever it is, they just declared war on your father. I hung up. The house was darkening. Shadows stretched across the floor of the study. I looked at the signature line on the trust document, Gabriella Ross. It remained blank. I wasn't going to sign. I was going to find the successor. I thought about the people in my mother's life. She didn't have many friends. She was isolated, but she had the paralegal. Sarah. She had me. She had... I stopped. Vance. My mother's name was Margaret Vance Ross, but I had a middle name too. One I never used. Gabriella Vance Ross. I felt a chill run down my spine. What if the M didn't stand for Margaret? What if it stood for manager? Or what if it was a typo? Or... No, that was a stretch. But the paralegal had said, Juniper Ridge was formed with an address linked to a small office building her mother owned. I needed to go back to that building. I needed to see who was paying the rent. Suddenly, the front door opened. My father was home. I could hear his heavy footsteps in the foyer. He was muttering to himself. I stepped out of the study and met him in the hall. He looked exhausted. His tie was loosened, his eyes red. Did you sign it? He asked. No, hello. No, how are you? Not yet. I said, Gabriella. He groaned. Do not test me today. I just fired 42 people. I am not in the mood for your teenage rebellion. It's not rebellion. Dad, it's due diligence. Due diligence, he mocked. You sound like a first-year law student. You have until the morning. The notary will be here at 9. He started to walk up the stairs, then stopped. He looked down at me. You think you are clever, he said. You think you are finding secrets. But you are just finding the plumbing. It is ugly, but it keeps the house standing. Stop trying to break the pipes. He continued up the stairs. I watched him go. He was wrong. The pipes weren't keeping the house standing. They were pumping poison into the foundation. And I was going to shut the water off. I went to my room and packed a small bag. I wasn't sleeping here tonight. I couldn't. The air was too thin. I texted Grant. Meet me at the old diner on Route 9. We need to talk. Alone. I waited. 3 dots appeared. I can't. He's watching. I stared at the screen. Who? Dad. He's tracking my phone. I felt a surge of cold fury. Grant was 36, and his father was tracking his phone like he was a delinquent teenager. Leave the phone, I texted back. Come anyway. A long pause. Okay. I grabbed my keys and walked out of the house, past the silent study, past the watching portraits of ancestors who probably had secrets of their own. I was done being a spectator. My mother had left me a key, a letter, and a warning. But she had also left me something else, something I was just starting to understand. She had left me the truth, and truth, as it turned out, was the only inheritance that mattered. The morning broke with a gray, relentless drizzle that seemed to wash the color out of Briar Glen. I had spent the night at a motel on the edge of town, the kind with thin walls and neon signs that buzzed like trapped insects. I hadn't slept. My laptop sat open on the cheap laminate desk, the screen glowing with the results of a request I had filed at 8 a.m., sharp when the county clerk's digital portal opened. I was looking at the transaction history of Juniper Ridge Holdings. It was supposed to be a boring list of filing fees and annual report submissions. Instead, it was a map of my family's survival. I scrolled through 7 years of data. There was a pattern. It was quiet, almost rhythmic. Every 18 months or so, there would be a distribution. $50,000 here, $120,000 there. They were listed as administrative maintenance or consulting fees, innocuous labels that would bore a casual observer to tears. But I knew the timeline of North Pine's crises. I had grown up hearing about them at the dinner table. I cross-referenced the dates. November 4 years ago. North Pine missed a bond payment deadline. 2 days later, Juniper Ridge wired $150,000 to a vendor account linked to North Pine. February 2 years ago. A supply chain freeze in Southeast Asia threatened to halt production. Juniper Ridge wired $200,000 to a logistics firm North Pine used. It wasn't just a one-time investment of $5.1 million. My mother, through this silent entity, had been patching the holes in my father's ship for years. I closed the laptop and rubbed my eyes. The coffee I had brewed in the room's tiny machine tasted like burnt plastic. I drove to the North Pine office. I didn't go to the executive suite. I went to the back loading dock, where Grant sometimes hid when he couldn't face the boardroom. He was there, standing near a stack of pallets, watching the rain hit the pavement. He looked older than 36. The lines around his eyes were etched deep, and his posture was slumped, as if the gravity of the building was crushing him. "Grant," I said. He didn't jump this time. He just turned his head slowly. "Did you come to watch the execution?" he asked. "We are processing the layoffs at noon." I walked over to him. I showed him the screenshot on my phone. "Look at the dates." "Grant." He squinted at the screen. "What is this?" "It is the payment history from Juniper Ridge." I said, "Look at November of 4 years ago. That was the bond crisis, right?" Grant nodded slowly. "Yeah. Dad said he called in a favor from a friend in New York to bridge the gap." "There was no friend," I said. "It was Mom's trust. Look at February 2 years ago, the logistics issue. Dad said he negotiated a deferred payment plan." Grant murmured, "He didn't." I said, "Juniper Ridge paid the freight." Grant took the phone from my hand. He stared at the numbers, his thumb scrolling down the list. I watched the realization wash over him, a slow, painful dawning that stripped away the last of his pride. "It wasn't me," he whispered. "What?" "I thought I was good at this," he said, his voice cracking. "When we got through those crunches, I thought it was because I managed the cash flow correctly. I thought I was a wizard. Gab. I thought I was saving the company." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and wet. "It was just Mom," he said. "It was Mom putting money in the meter so the lights wouldn't go out. And Dad took credit for it. He let me believe I was solving problems that she was paying for. He wasn't just lying to us about the money. Grant, he was lying to you about your own competence." Grant leaned back against the brick wall and slid down until he was crouching, his head in his hands. He made me feel like I owed him. Grant said into his palms. Every time we survived a crisis, he would say, "See, Grant? The Ross name opens doors. You have to be strong to carry it." He was teaching me to be grateful for a lie. I crouched beside him. She was protecting us. Grant. She knew Dad would run the company to the edge of the cliff. She built a safety net so we wouldn't crash. And now the net is gone, Grant said. "Because I am inheriting the estate." "No," I said. "I don't think that is why." My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an email notification. I pulled it out. The subject line made my stomach turn. Signing appointment. Caraway Legal Group. It was from my father's assistant, Gabriella. "Mr. Ross has scheduled the final signing of the amended trust for tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the offices of Caraway Legal. Your attendance is welcome but unnecessary, as the document has been restructured to allow for execution with the primary beneficiary only. Please confirm receipt. Welcome but unnecessary." He was cutting me out of the room. He was going to sign the new trust with Grant, bypassing my refusal, likely by using a clause that allowed the grantor to override a beneficiary's objection if preservation of the estate was at risk. He was polite. He was professional. He was absolutely lethal. I stood up. "I have to go." I said, "Where?" Grant asked, not looking up. "To find out why the net really broke." I said, "I left him there in the rain." A CEO who had just realized he was merely a passenger in his own car. I called Lena Hart from the car. "Did you find the successor?" I asked. "I am working on it." Lena said, "The trail is buried deep. But Gabriella, I found something else. I read the fine print of the original Juniper Ridge operating agreement, the one you photographed in the safe, and I found the trigger, she said. Her voice was tight, vibrating with a mix of excitement and horror. The clause that caused the withdrawal? I asked. Yes, it is not about market risk. It is not about business performance. It is a specific covenant tied to the beneficiary structure of the Ross Family Trust. Read it to me, I said. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart hammering. Lena cleared her throat. In the event that the grantor, Malcolm Ross, takes any action to remove, reduce, or otherwise impair the inheritance rights of Gabriella Vance Ross, such action shall constitute a material breach. Upon such breach, all outstanding capital, loans, and accrued interest owed to Juniper Ridge Holdings shall become immediately due and payable. The silence in the car was deafening. He did it. I whispered. He pulled the trigger. Lena said, when he announced that Grant deserves the entire estate, when he filed that intent to amend the trust to disinherit you, he activated the clause. The silent partner didn't leave. Gabriella, your father evicted the money by trying to evict you. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was like vertigo. My mother had anticipated this. 7 years ago, she had sat in a lawyer's office and imagined a future where her husband would try to erase her daughter, and she had loved me enough, and known him well enough, to build a trap. It feels like love, I said, my voice shaking. But it also feels like she knew he was a monster. She knew he was a narcissist, Lena corrected. And she knew the only thing he valued more than control was solvency. She tied his money to your name. She made you the keystone, Gabriella. He couldn't crush you without crushing the company, but he doesn't know. I realized. He thinks it is just a market withdrawal. He doesn't know the clause exists because he never read the paperwork. He told Grant to ignore the fine print. He is flying blind, Lena said. He is destroying his own empire because he is too arrogant to read the instructions. I need to tell him. I said, no, Lena said sharply. If you tell him now, he will shred the document. He will claim it is a forgery. He will bully Caraway Legal into finding a loophole. You need leverage. You need to trap him in the lie publicly. How? You need to stop that signing tomorrow, Lena said. But you can't just walk in and yell. You need a witness. Someone who knows his playbook. I hung up and stared at the rain-slicked windshield. A witness. I thought of the stories I had heard over the years. The men my father had chewed up and spit out. Most of them had moved away, retired to Florida or Arizona to nurse their ulcers. But there was one name that stuck. Frank Russo. He had been the CFO of North Pine for 15 years. My father had fired him 5 years ago, claiming Frank had lost his edge. The rumor in town was that Frank had refused to sign off on a valuation my father wanted to use for a loan application. I searched his name. He still lived in Briar Glen, in a small bungalow on the south side, far from the country club. I drove there. Frank was in his driveway, washing a vintage Ford Mustang. He was a thick-set man with white hair and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He watched me pull up. He didn't smile. Gabriella Ross, he said as I got out of the car. You look like Malcolm. Unfortunately for you. I need 5 minutes. Frank, I said. I don't have 5 minutes for a Ross, he said, dipping his sponge into a bucket of soapy water. Grant is about to fire 40 people. I said. Frank paused. The sponge hovered over the hood of the car. Grant is a good kid, Frank grunted. He doesn't have the stomach for the butcher shop. My father is forcing him. Frank resumed scrubbing. That sounds right. Malcolm loves to make other people hold the knife. I walked closer. The smell of car soap and wet pavement filled the air. I found out about Juniper Ridge. I said, Frank stopped scrubbing again. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were sharp. You shouldn't say that name out loud, he said. I know about the payments. I continued. I know my mother was funding the company, and I know Malcolm triggered the clawback by trying to disinherit me. Frank threw the sponge into the bucket. It made a wet, heavy splash. He wiped his hands on a rag. Your mother was a saint, he said quietly. She came to me. You know, Years ago, she asked me how bad the books really were. I told her the truth. Malcolm was leveraging the company to death to pay for his lifestyle and his ego projects. She asked me how to stop him. What did you tell her? I told her she couldn't stop him. Frank said, I told her the only way to control Malcolm is to control the money. So she set up the LLC. She poured her own inheritance into it. She became the bank. Why did you leave, Frank? I didn't leave, he said. His voice hard. I was pushed. Malcolm wanted to refinance the debt. He wanted to hide the Juniper Ridge liability so the bank would give him more cash. I refused to cook the books. So he fired me for incompetence and threatened to ruin my pension if I talked. He rewrites the agreements. I said, he changes the story, every time. Frank said, he views contracts as suggestions. He thinks reality is something he can negotiate. I need you to come with me. Frank, where? To the signing tomorrow. Frank laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. I am not walking back into that viper's nest. I am retired. Gabriella. I fix cars. I drink beer on my porch. I don't fight Malcolm Ross. He is going to destroy North Pine. I said, he is going to wipe out the workers, the people you worked with for 15 years, and he is going to blame it on Grant. Frank looked at the Mustang. He ran a hand over the fender. He blamed me too. Frank said softly. He told the board I was senile. If you come with me, I said, we can prove he is the one who destroyed the company. We can prove he triggered the debt. We can save the jobs. Frank looked at me. He studied my face, searching for something. You really are like her, he said. You have her eyes, but you have his stubbornness. Is that a yes? Frank sighed. He tossed the rag onto the hood. What time? 10 o'clock. I'll be there, he said. But if Malcolm tries to sue me, I'm billing you for my lawyer. I drove back to the motel, feeling a strange sense of calm. I had the documents, I had the witness, I had the truth, but I still had a brother who was terrified. I texted Grant, meet me at the office, late, after everyone is gone. He was there when I arrived at 9 p.m. The office was dark, lit only by the emergency exit signs and the glow of the city outside. Grant was sitting in his office, the list of layoffs on the desk in front of him. He hadn't sent it yet. You didn't do it? I asked. I couldn't, he said. I stalled. I told Dad the HR software was down. He screamed at me for 20 minutes. I sat down across from him. We are going to stop him. Grant. Grant looked at me, his face pale in the shadows. How? By showing him a piece of paper? He will tear it up. He will laugh. You don't get it. Gab. He doesn't care about the truth. He will care about this. I said, I told him about the clause, about the direct link between my disinheritance and the debt. Grant listened, his mouth slightly open. He did this? Grant whispered. He caused the panic? Yes. Grant let out a long, shaky breath. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He told me I was weak, Grant said. He told me I was losing the company because I didn't have the killer instinct. And the whole time, he was the one who pulled the pin on the grenade. Grant looked at me. But Gab, you can't just blow everything up. What do you mean? If you expose this, if you go to war with him publicly, the lenders will see the chaos. They will call the loans anyway. North Pine creates things. We have vendors, customers, employees. They need stability. If we turn this into a Greek tragedy, the company dies. I saw the fear in his eyes. It wasn't fear for himself anymore. It was fear for the people he felt responsible for. He wasn't the weak link Malcolm claimed he was. He was the only one who actually cared about the consequences. I'm not going to burn it down. Grant, I said, I'm going to perform surgery. Surgery? We are going to the signing tomorrow. Me, you, Lena, and Frank Russo. Frank? Grant's eyes widened. Frank Russo? Dad hates him. Exactly. We are going to corner him. We aren't going to make a scene in front of the bank. We are going to make a scene in front of his lawyers. We are going to force him to retract the amendment and acknowledge the Juniper Ridge terms. And if he refuses, then we show him that we hold the kill switch. I said, Grant looked at the list of names on his desk. He picked up a pen and drew a line through the title. Termination schedule. He looked up at me. "He is going to be vicious," Grant warned. "When he is cornered, he doesn't fight fair. He goes for the throat." "I know," I said. Grant stood up. He walked around the desk and stood in front of me. "I'm scared." "Gab," he admitted. "I am too." He nodded. "Okay," he said. "Let's go get Mom's money back." I went back to the motel and drafted the plan. It had to be precise. I needed to present the evidence in a way that Caraway Legal couldn't ignore. Lawyers are ethically bound to acknowledge facts once they are presented. If I showed them the Juniper Ridge clause, they couldn't knowingly let Malcolm sign a document that triggered a default. They would be liable. I was using the system against him. Malcolm loved the law when it was a shield. He was about to find out what it felt like when it was a sword. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Your presence is welcome but unnecessary. My father had spent my entire life telling me I was unnecessary. I was the girl, the backup plan. The one who was supposed to marry well and stay quiet? Tomorrow, I was going to be the most necessary person in the room. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. I kept seeing the image of my mother's letter. Check the safe. She hadn't just left me money. She had left me a choice. I could have walked away. I could have let Grant inherit the ruin. I could have stayed in Chicago. But that was what Malcolm wanted. He wanted us separated. He wanted us weak. I thought about the maintenance payments, the small, quiet infusions of cash that kept the lights on. My mother had been keeping the family together with her checkbook for years. Now, I had to do it with the truth. The phone rang. It was late, past midnight. I looked at the screen. Unknown number. I picked it up. "Hello? Gabriella?" It was my stepmother, Elena. Her voice was a hushed whisper. "Elena? Is everything okay?" "He knows you are meeting with people," she said. "What?" "He has someone watching the motel. He knows you met with Frank Russo. He knows you have a forensic accountant." I sat up, my heart racing. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because he is planning to move the assets tonight." She said, "He is on the phone with an offshore specialist right now. He is trying to transfer the North Pine IP to a Cayman entity before the signing tomorrow. He wants to hollow out the company so that even if Juniper Ridge collects, there is nothing to grab." "Why, Elena? Why is he doing this?" "Because he would rather be king of the ashes than a servant in his own house." She said. She paused. "Stop him. Gabriella. Please." The line went dead. I stared at the phone. He was escalating. He was willing to strip the company of its value, to steal the intellectual property, just to win the argument. I couldn't wait for the meeting. The timeline had just compressed. I texted Grant. "Change of plans. He is moving the assets tonight. We can't wait for the lawyers." Grant replied instantly. "What do we do?" "We go to the house." I wrote, "Now." I grabbed my coat and the file. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the world into a blur of gray and black. I wasn't going to let him turn North Pine into a shell. I wasn't going to let him rob my mother twice. I walked out to the car. The dark sedan that had been parked across the street turned its headlights on as soon as I moved. Malcolm's watcher. I didn't care. Let him watch. I put the car in gear and drove toward the estate. The final act wasn't going to happen in a sterile conference room. It was going to happen where it started, in the house that lies built. The conference room at Caraway Legal Group was designed to intimidate. It was situated on the 42nd floor, encased in glass that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a view that said, quite clearly, that the people inside this room were above the concerns of the people down on the sidewalk. The table was a slab of polished marble, cold and unforgiving. My father sat at the head of it. He was flanked by his new legal team. 3 men in identical charcoal suits who looked less like attorneys and more like a phalanx of guards. Grant sat to his right, looking pale and nauseous, staring at a bottle of water he hadn't opened. They were waiting for me, but they were expecting the Gabriella they knew, the one who would walk in alone, head down, and sign whatever piece of paper made the shouting stop. They were not expecting the entourage I brought with me, I walked in first. Behind me was Lena Hart, clutching a thick binder of financial traces, and behind her was Silas Thorne. Silas was a retired judge, a man recommended by the paralegal at Hallow Reese. He was 70 years old, wearing a tweed jacket that looked out of place among the Italian wool suits, and he carried a cane not because he needed it, but because he liked to point with it. He was a certified mediator, and more importantly, he was immune to Malcolm Ross's charm. "Gabriella," my father said, standing up. His smile was tight, a grimace masquerading as a greeting. "You brought guests. This is a private family signing. It is a settlement conference now." "Dad," I said. I took the seat at the opposite end of the table. Lena and Silas sat on either side of me. "Who are these people?" Malcolm demanded, looking at his lead attorney. "Sterling." "Get them out." "Mr. Ross," Silas said, his voice grave and resonant, filling the room without effort. "I am here to ensure that any document signed today withstands the scrutiny of the probate court, and considering the irregularities my client has uncovered, I would suggest you let us stay, unless, of course, you prefer to have this conversation with the state attorney general." My father's jaw worked. He looked at Sterling. Sterling cleared his throat. "We can hear them out." "Malcolm, it changes nothing. The trust amendment is standard." Malcolm sat down slowly, his eyes locked on mine. "You are turning strangers against your family," he said softly. "This is a betrayal, Gabriella. A deep, ugly betrayal. The betrayal happened 7 years ago." I said. I placed the blue folder on the marble table. The sound it made, a soft slap against the stone, was the only noise in the room. "We are not here to argue about feelings. Dad, we are here to talk about Juniper Ridge Holdings." Grant's head snapped up. Sterling leaned forward. "We are aware of the entity. It is a minor asset. It is the creditor that just crippled North Pine." Lena cut in. She opened her binder, and we are here to demonstrate that the default wasn't a market fluctuation. It was a self-inflicted wound. Malcolm waved a hand dismissively. "That is Grant's business problem. We are here to sign the trust. They are the same thing," I said. I opened the folder and slid the copy of the Juniper Ridge operating agreement down the long table. It slid smoothly across the polished surface and stopped right in front of Grant. "Read the highlighted clause." "Grant," I said. Grant looked at his father, then at the paper. He picked it up. His hands were shaking. "Read it out loud," I said. Grant swallowed. His voice was raspy. "In the event that the grantor takes any action to remove, reduce, or otherwise impair the inheritance rights of Gabriella Vance Ross, such action shall constitute a material breach." Grant stopped. He looked up, his eyes wide. "Keep reading," I said. "Upon such breach, all outstanding capital, loans, and accrued interest owed to Juniper Ridge Holdings shall become immediately due and payable." The room went dead silent. The hum of the building's HVAC system seemed to roar. Grant looked at his father. "You triggered it," Grant whispered. Malcolm didn't look at him. He was staring at the document, his face turning a blotchy red. "It is a forgery," Malcolm snapped. "I never signed that." Lena produced another document. "Here is the signature page verification, notarized by Hallow and Reese 7 years ago. And here is the metadata from the bank transfer originating the loan, which references this specific agreement number. It is real, Mr. Ross." Grant stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You did this," Grant said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was filled with a horror that was painful to witness. "You announced the disinheritance at the dinner. That is what triggered the recall." Malcolm slammed his hand on the table. "I was protecting the company," he shouted. "I was consolidating the equity so you could run it without interference. I didn't know your mother had buried a landmine in the paperwork. You didn't read it." I said, "You were so arrogant, so sure that Mom was just a naive schoolteacher, that you didn't even read the terms of the money she gave you." "She didn't give it to me," Malcolm roared. "She tricked me. She used her own money to buy leverage. She used her money to buy protection, I yelled back. She knew you would do this. She knew that one day, your ego would get so big you would try to erase me. And she made sure that if you tried to cut me out, you would bleed to death. Grant looked down at the paper in his hand. $5.1 million. Grant said, You cost the company $5.1 million because you couldn't stand the idea of Gabriella having a share. Grant looked at the lawyers. Get out, he said. Sterling looked confused. Mr. Ross? I said get out, Grant screamed. The lawyers looked at Malcolm. Malcolm didn't move. He was staring at me with a hatred so pure it felt like heat. Leave us, Malcolm said quietly. The lawyers gathered their files and filed out, leaving the 5 of us in the glass box. Malcolm leaned back in his chair. He adjusted his cufflinks. He was trying to regain control, trying to find the narrative that made him the victim. So, he said, You found the trap. Congratulations. Your mother was more vindictive than I gave her credit for. She wasn't vindictive, Silas said calmly. She was prudent. This is a standard protection clause for a minority stakeholder. She was my wife, Malcolm spat. She shouldn't have been treating me like a hostile takeover target. You treated her like an ATM, I said. You lied about the medical bills. You lied about the silent partner. And now you are trying to lie about the trust. I am not lying about the trust. Malcolm said, I am amending it. It is my money. Gabriella, I built this estate. I can leave it to whoever I want. Not anymore. Lena said. She flipped a page in her binder. We traced the ownership structure of Juniper Ridge, she said. When your wife died, the interest didn't pass to you. Malcolm, it passed to a trust. So what? Malcolm said. I am the trustee of her estate, not this specific trust. Lena said. She looked at me. Gabriella, do you know why your mother's maiden name was on the initial manager line? I thought she was just hiding it. I said, she was. Lena said, but she was also designating the successor. Lena slid a final document across the table. It was a certificate of incumbency, dated the day after my mother died. Upon the death of the initial manager, all management rights and controlling interest in Juniper Ridge Holdings, LLC, shall pass to the designated successor, Gabriella Vance Ross. I stared at the paper. I wasn't just the beneficiary. I was the manager. The $5.1 million wasn't just a debt owed to a faceless entity. It was a debt owed to me. I looked up at my father. He was reading the document, his face draining of color. For the first time in my life, I saw him truly afraid. Not angry, not annoyed, afraid. You control the note, he whispered. I do. I said. I felt a surge of power, but it didn't feel like triumph. It felt heavy. It felt like responsibility. Which means, I continued, my voice steady, that I am the one who can call the debt, or I am the one who can forgive it. The room was silent. Grant looked at me. His eyes were wide, hopeful. You can stop it. Gab? He asked. You can tell the bank to back off? I can. I said. I looked at Malcolm. But I won't do it for free. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. This is blackmail, he hissed. It is a negotiation, Silas corrected. Here is the deal. Dad, I said. I pulled a document out of my own bag. I had drafted it with Silas at the motel at 4 a.m. I will issue a forbearance on the Juniper Ridge debt. I will reinstate the capital support for North Pine. The lender will see the cash injection. The covenant will be cured, and the company will survive. Grant won't have to fire anyone. And what do you want? Malcolm asked. His voice was dripping with venom. Half? You want half of everything? No, I said. I don't want your money. I want my mother's voice back. I slid the agreement toward him. You will withdraw the amendment to the trust. You will sign this addendum acknowledging that the original estate plan, the one that splits the assets equally, is irrevocable without my consent. And you will formally acknowledge, in writing, that the capital for North Pine came from Margaret Ross, not from your connections. Malcolm stared at the paper. You want me to admit I took money from her? He said. You want me to put it in the company records? I want the truth in the records. I said, He looked at the paper like it was infectious. "I can't sign this," he said. "Why?" Grant asked. "Why can't you sign it?" "It saves the company." "Dad, it saves 40 jobs. Because it humiliates me," Malcolm shouted. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "You want me to tell the board, the bank, the world that I was bailed out by my wife? That I am only standing here because she allowed it? You want to emasculate me in my own boardroom? It is not about you," Grant yelled. He stood up too, facing his father. For the first time, he looked just as tall. "It is always about me," Malcolm screamed back. "I am the creator. I am the one who built this. I am the one who matters." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "I will not sign. I will not let you rewrite my life. I would rather see North Pine burn to the ground than have you walk around thinking you own me." Grant stared at him. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Malcolm's heavy breathing. "You would rather the company die?" Grant asked quietly. "If the alternative is surrendering to her?" Malcolm said, looking at me with cold, dead eyes. "Yes, let it die. I can build another one. I have done it before." Grant looked at our father. He looked at the man who had demanded perfection, who had demanded loyalty, who had demanded everything. "You can't build another one," Grant said. "You're old, Dad, and you're alone." Malcolm flinched. "I am not alone," he said. "I have you." Grant shook his head. "No," Grant said. "You don't." Grant turned to me. "Do it, Gab," he said. "Do what?" I asked. "Call the debt," he said. "Enforce the default." "Grant," I said, "if I do that, the company goes into receivership. You lose your job." "I don't care," Grant said. His voice was steady now. "I don't want to be the CEO of a lie anymore. If he wants to burn it down, let him. But let's make sure everyone knows who lit the match." Grant turned back to Malcolm. "I quit, Dad." "What?" Malcolm whispered. "I quit. I am not firing those people for you, and I'm not pretending you are a genius anymore. I am done." Grant walked over to where I was sitting. He put a hand on my shoulder. "Let's go," he said. Malcolm stood there, surrounded by the glass walls. He looked small. The city skyline behind him didn't look like his kingdom anymore. It looked like a backdrop he was about to be evicted from. "You will regret this," Malcolm shouted as we gathered our things. "You will come crawling back when you realize you are nothing without the Ross name." I stopped at the door. I looked back at him. "We are the Ross name, Dad," I said. "You're just the history." We walked out. The elevator ride down was silent. Silas looked at his watch and murmured something about a lunch appointment. Lena looked at her phone, checking the market close times. Grant leaned his head against the metal wall of the elevator. He looked exhausted, but the tension in his shoulders, the tension that had been there for years, was gone. He refused. Grant said softly, "He actually refused. He chose the story." I said, "He always chooses the story." We walked out into the lobby. The rain had stopped, but the pavement was still wet, reflecting the gray sky. "What happens now?" Grant asked. "Now," Lena said, stepping forward. "The clock starts." She held up her phone. "The lender just emailed. They saw the filing alert for the trust dispute. They are demanding proof of liquidity by close of business Friday. That is 48 hours. If we don't fix it?" Grant asked. "Then they call the operating lines." Lena said, "Payroll bounces on Monday. The vendors stop shipping. The company enters a death spiral." "Can we use the Juniper Ridge money?" Grant asked me. "You control it now. Can you just give it to the company?" I shook my head. "I can't just give it." I said, "If I inject capital while Malcolm is still the majority owner, I am just giving him ammunition. He will use that money to fight us. He will use it to sue us. So we are stuck." Grant said, "No." I said, "We aren't stuck. We have leverage." I looked at Lena. "What are the rights of the controlling member of Juniper Ridge in the event of a default?" Lena smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "If the borrower defaults," she said, "the lender has the right to step in. You can't just take the money back. Gabriella, You can seize the collateral. And what is the collateral? I asked. Lena tapped her binder. Voting shares, she said. The loan was secured by 20% of Malcolm's voting stock in North Pine. I did the math in my head. Malcolm owned 60%. Grant owned 10%. I owned nothing. The rest was scattered among small investors. If I seize the 20%, you have 20, Lena said. Grant has 10. That is 30. Malcolm still has 40, Grant said. He still wins. Not necessarily. I said. I looked at Grant. Who owns the other 30%? The small investors, the board members, the retired executives. Grant's eyes lit up. Frank Russo. Grant said, Frank owns 2%. And the Miller family owns 5%, I said. And the pension fund owns 10%. If we can get them to vote with us, Grant said, his voice rising with excitement. If we combine our 30 with their 21, we have 51%. I said. We can vote him out, Grant whispered. We can remove him as chairman. It is a hostile takeover, Lena warned. It will be bloody. It will be public. And you have 48 hours to whip the votes before the bank shuts you down. I looked at the street. The traffic was moving, indifferent to our drama. My father had spent his life treating people like assets. He assumed that because he owned the majority of the shares, he owned the people. He forgot that shares represent trust, and he had bankrupted his trust years ago. I looked at Grant. Do you have the contact list for the minority shareholders? I asked. Grant pulled out his phone. I have everyone. He said, Then let's go. I said, We have a board to overthrow. We started walking toward the car. Behind us, 42 stories up. I knew my father was watching. He was probably pouring a scotch, telling himself he had won because he hadn't signed the paper. He thought the refusal was a victory of will. He didn't realize it was a resignation letter. The deadline was Friday, but the war had already started, and this time, the kind one was bringing the army. The 48 hours leading up to the lender's deadline did not feel like a movie montage. There was no upbeat music, no sudden breakthroughs fueled by caffeine and genius. It was a slow, grinding war of attrition waged in the conference room of a budget hotel, where the air conditioner rattled like a dying engine and the coffee tasted like battery acid. Lena Hart was a machine. She had set up a command center on the wobbly desk, cross-referencing the North Pine bylaws with the Juniper Ridge operating agreement. We have a path, Lena said around 2 a.m. on Thursday. She rubbed her temples, pushing her glasses up into her messy hair. But it is nuclear. Gabriella, tell me, I said, the Juniper Ridge loan is secured by Malcolm's voting shares. She explained, We knew that. But there is a governance clause in the security agreement. If the borrower, North Pine, is in a state of imminent insolvency caused by the actions of the majority shareholder, the lender, you, can call an emergency shareholder meeting without the board's approval. And then what? I asked. Then you propose a resolution to remove the chairman. Lena said, You vote your seized shares. Grant votes his. If you can get Frank Russo and the other minority holders to align, you have 51%. You fire your father. I stared at the water stain on the ceiling. Firing him. It sounded impossible. Malcolm Ross was not an employee. He was the architecture. Removing him from North Pine was like trying to remove the foundation from a skyscraper while people were still working inside. If we do this, I said, it becomes public record. The motion, the vote, the reason for the removal. It all goes into the minutes. The bank sees it. The employees see it. Yes, Lena said, you destroy the myth of the happy family dynasty. You expose the rot to save the structure. I looked at my phone. No messages from my father. He was probably at the house, convinced that his silence was a weapon, waiting for me to crack and come begging for a truce. Prepare the motion. I told Lena. That night, I drove to the North Pine office. The parking lot was empty, a vast sea of wet asphalt reflecting the streetlights. I used my old key card to get in. I wasn't sure it would still work, but the light turned green with a cheerful beep. I found Grant in the executive wing. He was sitting on the floor of his office, surrounded by boxes, He wasn't packing. He was sorting. Old photos, awards, prototypes of valves that had long since been replaced. "Grant?" I whispered. He looked up. He looked terrible. His eyes were rimmed with red. His shirt wrinkled. "I am tired." "Gab," he said softly. I sat down next to him. "We found a way." I said, "We can force a vote tomorrow. We can stop him." Grant didn't smile. He picked up a framed photo of the two of us from a summer vacation 20 years ago. We were smiling, squinting into the sun, oblivious to the fact that the man taking the picture viewed us as investments, not children. I have spent my whole life trying to be the son he wanted. Grant said, "I changed the way I walked. I changed the way I spoke. I went to the business school he chose. I married the woman he approved of. And then she left because she realized there was no me inside the suit." He looked at me, and the vulnerability in his face broke my heart. "I am the chosen son," he said, "and it feels like being a prisoner. If I vote with you tomorrow, if I do this, I am killing that version of myself. I am killing the only thing he values about me. He values your obedience, Grant, not you. I know," he said. He took a shaky breath. He turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "What do you want, Gab? Not what can you prove. Not what can you win. What do you actually want?" The question hung in the air, heavy and intimate. "I want to breathe," I said. "I want to wake up in the morning and not feel his shadow. And I want to know that Mom didn't die for nothing. She tried to build us a lifeboat. Grant, I just want us to get in it." Grant nodded slowly. He placed the photo face down on the floor. "Okay," he said. "Let's get in the boat." I left him there and drove to the estate. It was reckless. Lena had told me to stay away, to limit contact. But I couldn't let the end happen in a boardroom with lawyers present. I needed to look him in the eye one last time without the legal shields. The house was dark, except for the light in the study. I walked in. Malcolm was sitting in his leather armchair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The room smelled of expensive scotch and wood polish. "You are trespassing," he said without looking at me. "It is still my house." "Dad," I said, "until you write me out of the will, I am still family." "You wrote yourself out," he said. "You chose money over loyalty. I chose truth over control." I corrected. He swirled the ice in his glass. "Control is love, Gabriella," he said. His voice was calm, which made it more terrifying. "You guide the people you care about. You mold them. You ensure they don't make mistakes. I gave Grant a path. I gave you a safety net. And you tore it all down because you felt— what, slighted?" "I wasn't slighted." I said, "I was erased. You didn't give Grant a path. You gave him a cage. And you didn't give me a safety net. You gave me an exit because you didn't think I was worth the investment." Malcolm stood up. He walked to the window. Looking out at the dark grounds, "You are making me the villain," he said. "I am not making you anything." I said, "I am just reading the minutes. You triggered the debt, Dad. You tried to cheat the trust. You are doing this to yourself." He turned around, and his face was a mask of tragic confusion. He truly didn't see it. He couldn't see it. In his mind, he was the protagonist of a Greek epic, beset by ungrateful children and treacherous wives. He was Lear, but without the madness, just the narcissism. "Get out," he said. "See you in hell, or the boardroom." I said. I walked out. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt a deep, hollow sadness. He was a man who would rather be right than be loved, and he was about to get exactly what he wanted. I went back to the motel. I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop and went back to the digital archive of my mother's files. There was one subfolder I hadn't opened yet. It was labeled Emergency. I clicked it. It was a single PDF document, scanned from a handwritten letter. I read it, and the world tilted on its axis. "My dearest Gabriella, if you are reading this, then the silence has broken. I hope it never comes to this. I hope Malcolm softens. But I know him. He views life as a negotiation he must win. I created Juniper Ridge not just to protect the family from bankruptcy, but to protect you from obligation. Malcolm will try to use the estate to trap you. He will dangle inheritance like a carrot to make you stay, to make you serve the family myth. This money, my money, is your way out. It is a choice. If he ever forces you to choose between your dignity and his approval, use the key. Call the debt. Burn the leverage. You don't have to save the company, Gabby. You just have to save yourself. I stared at the screen, tears blurring the words. She hadn't just built a trap for Malcolm. She had built a door for me. She knew that saving the company might be the right thing to do, but she had given me the permission to walk away if the cost was too high. But I wasn't going to walk away. Not because I needed the money, but because Grant couldn't walk away yet. He needed me to open the door for him. Friday morning arrived with a leaden sky. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick and heavy. We met at the North Pine headquarters. The large conference room was already populated. The representative from the lender, a stern man named Mr. Henderson, sat at the end of the table with a team of auditors. They looked like undertakers. Grant was there, sitting to the right of the empty chairman's seat. He looked pale but composed. Frank Russo was there, wearing a suit that was 10 years out of date, sitting with his arms crossed, looking like he was ready for a fistfight. Then Malcolm arrived. He walked in with Sterling and the Caraway team. He looked immaculate, freshly shaved, suit pressed, a silk tie that shimmered under the fluorescent lights. He didn't look like a man facing execution. He looked like a man who had already made a deal. "Good morning," Malcolm said breezily. He sat at the head of the table. "Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "Mr. Ross, we are here for the proof of stability. The covenant breach regarding the Juniper Ridge withdrawal must be cured today, or we move to freeze operations." Malcolm smiled. He opened a folder. "There is no need for panic," he said. "I have a solution that resolves the liquidity crisis immediately." I frowned. I looked at Lena. She shook her head slightly. "We didn't know about this. I have entered into a preliminary agreement," Malcolm announced, "to sell the intellectual property rights of our core valve technology to a competitor. Apex Industries," Grant gasped. "You're selling the patents?" "I am monetizing an asset," Malcolm corrected. "The sale will generate $12 million by Monday. That covers the Juniper Ridge debt and provides ample operating capital. But the patents are the business," Grant shouted, standing up. "If you sell the IP, North Pine becomes just a shell. We won't be a manufacturer anymore. We will just be a landlord for empty factories." "We will pivot," Malcolm said dismissively. "We will focus on distribution." "You are gutting the company," I said, my voice rising. "You are selling the future to pay for your mistakes." Malcolm looked at me with cold amusement. "I am saving the estate. Gabriella, the company is just a vehicle. If the vehicle is heavy, you lighten the load." "Mr. Henderson looked at the document Malcolm had slid across the table. This would satisfy the immediate liquidity requirement," Henderson admitted, "though it does fundamentally alter the business model." I looked at Grant. He was staring at his father with horror. He realized what this was. Malcolm wasn't trying to save the jobs. He wasn't trying to save the legacy. He was cashing out. He was going to strip the company to the studs, pay off the debts, keep his personal fortune intact, and blame the collapse on the ungrateful daughter who forced his hand. He would walk away rich. The employees would walk away with nothing. I couldn't let him do it. "Mr. Henderson," I said, standing up, "you cannot accept that proposal. And why not?" "Ms. Ross?" Henderson asked. "Because Mr. Ross does not have the authority to make it." I said. Malcolm laughed. "I am the chairman and the majority shareholder. I have the authority." "Not anymore," I said. I signaled to Lena. She handed copies of a document to Henderson, then to Sterling, and finally to Malcolm. "This is a notice of emergency shareholder action," I said, "pursuant to the security agreement of the Juniper Ridge loan, which is currently in default due to the chairman's actions. I am exercising my right to seize the voting rights of the collateralized shares." Malcolm froze. The smile vanished. "That is illegal," he snapped. "You can't seize shares without a court order. The agreement allows for self-help remedies in the event of imminent insolvency, Lena said calmly. And proposing to sell the core IP constitutes a liquidation event. We are seizing the 20%. I turned to the room. I am calling a vote. I said, the motion is to remove Malcolm Ross as chairman and CEO of North Pine Industrial Solutions, effective immediately, for gross mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. The room erupted. Sterling was shouting objections. Malcolm was standing, his face purple with rage. You cannot do this, Malcolm roared. This is my company. I have 20%, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I vote yes. I looked at Frank Russo. Frank? Frank stood up. He looked at Malcolm with a decade of suppressed anger. I vote yes, Frank said. That is 2%. I looked at the Miller family proxy. A young lawyer in the back. She nodded. I vote yes. 5%. That is 27%. Malcolm sneered. You need 51. I still hold 40. And Grant holds 10. He turned to Grant. Tell her. Grant. Tell her this is insanity. Tell her we are selling the patents and moving on. The room went quiet. Everyone looked at Grant. This was the moment, the pivot point of his entire life. Grant looked at the table. He looked at the list of employees he had refused to fire. He looked at the patent documents, the work of engineers he had lunch with, the future of the company his grandfather built. Then he looked at Malcolm. You aren't saving the company. Dad, Grant said quietly, you are scrapping it. I am saving us, Malcolm hissed. No, Grant said, you are saving yourself. Grant stood up. His legs were shaking. But he stood tall. I agree with the motion, Grant said. Grant! Malcolm shouted. The silent partner crisis was caused by improper interference with estate structures by the chairman. Grant said, his voice gaining strength. He triggered the debt. He caused the panic, and now he is trying to burn the house down to hide the evidence. Grant looked at me. I vote yes, he said. Silence. Absolute. Ringing silence. 27 plus 10 makes 37. Sterling said quickly, you are still short. I looked at the final proxy holder, the representative for the pension fund. I vote yes, the man said. 10%. That is 47. Lena said, we need 4 more. I looked at Mr. Henderson, the lender. The security agreement gives the lender the right to vote the remaining collateral in a deadlock. I said, Mr. Henderson, if you let Malcolm sell the IP, you get your money back today, but you lose a client forever if you vote with us. We recapitalize the company using the Juniper Ridge funds, we keep the patents, and we continue operations. Henderson looked at Malcolm, who was vibrating with rage. Then he looked at Grant, who looked ready to vomit but resolute. Then he looked at me. Stability. Henderson murmured. He raised his hand. The bank exercises its proxy on the unassigned shares. Henderson said, we vote yes. Malcolm fell back into his chair. It is done, Lena said. The motion carries. Malcolm Ross is removed. Malcolm didn't scream. He didn't throw the chair. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the polished marble table where he had ruled for 40 years. He slowly buttoned his jacket. He adjusted his cuffs. He stood up. He didn't look at Grant. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked at me. You think you won, he said quietly. I saved the jobs. Dad, you humiliated your father. He said, you turned private business into a public spectacle. You opened the books for the world to see our laundry. I cleaned the laundry. I said, Malcolm picked up his briefcase. He walked to the door, his posture rigid, his dignity wrapped around him like armor. He stopped at the threshold and looked back. You'll regret this, he said. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day. You will need me. You will realize that you can't run a kingdom with kindness. Gabriella. And when that day comes, do not call me. It wasn't a movie villain's scream. It was a promise. It was the threat of a man who still had money, who still had connections, and who now had nothing to do but nurse a grudge. He walked out. The door clicked shut. The air in the room seemed to change. The pressure dropped. Frank Russo let out a long, loud breath. Grant collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Mr. Henderson stood up. Mrs. Ross, Mr. Ross, he said, we will expect the revised capitalization plan by Monday. Good day. When the room cleared, it was just me and Grant. He looked up at me. He looked like a child who had just survived a storm. Is he gone? Grant asked. He is gone, I said. Grant nodded. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was tight. Thanks, Gab, he whispered. Don't thank me, I said. Thank Mom. I pulled the key out of my pocket, the small silver key that had started it all. I placed it on the table between us. It wasn't just metal, it was the legacy. Not the one Malcolm had tried to force on us, but the one we had chosen. The one that said family wasn't about who controlled the money. It was about who held the key when the door was locked. We had a lot of work to do. The company was messy. The family was broken. But for the first time in 33 years, the story belonged to us. Thank you for listening to Dad Announced Your Brother Deserves the Entire Estate. Then his company lost its $5.1 million silent partner. I hope you enjoyed this journey of secrets, betrayal, and reclaiming the truth. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below and let me know where you are listening from. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Revenge Stories for more realistic, emotional dramas. Share your thoughts in English in the comments section. I read every single one. Until next time.